He laughed in Keanu Reeves' face and snatched the dog away until the shelter staff uncovered the shocking truth about who Keanu really was. What happened next left everyone speechless. You won't believe how this spoiled rich kid's world turned upside down. Dylan Whitmore strolled into the animal shelter like he owned the place. Dressed in designer jeans and a tailored blazer, he barely spared a glance at the cages lined with hopeful eyes and wagging tails. His father, Richard Whitmore, was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country, and Dylan had grown up never hearing the word no. He wasn't here because he cared about animals, he was here because his latest girlfriend had mentioned she liked guys with dogs. A shelter employee, a woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and a kind smile, approached him. "Welcome to Sunny Paws Shelter. Are you looking for a particular breed?" Or Dylan cut her off with a wave of his hand. "I want something that looks good in photos. Something expensive looking. Maybe a husky or a golden retriever." He glanced at his phone, barely paying attention. "Oh, and it needs to be a puppy. None of those old rescue dogs. I don't want one that's been used." The woman's smile faltered. "All our dogs are looking for loving homes. Many of them have had difficult pasts, but they still deserve." Yeah, Dylan sighed. "Just show me the best one." As the employee led him down the aisle, another figure entered the shelter, a man dressed simply in jeans and a black t-shirt, his dark hair slightly tousled. He moved with a quiet grace, his eyes scanning the cages with genuine warmth. He crouched beside one of the kennels, reaching through the bars to let a shy, brown-furred mutt sniff his hand. Keanu Reeves. The staff instantly recognized him, but he gave them a small, humble nod, as if he were just any other person. Dylan, however, didn't recognize him. He was too focused on pretending to care about the dogs. Then Dylan saw it, the perfect puppy. A Siberian husky with striking blue eyes and a fluffy, snow-white coat. The moment he spotted it, he smirked. "That one. I want that one." Before the shelter employee could respond, another voice spoke. "He's beautiful," Keanu said, stepping closer, his voice gentle yet firm. "I've been looking for a rescue dog, and this little guy seems like a great fit." Dylan turned, his smug expression shifting into one of mild irritation. "Wait, what? You want him too?" Keanu nodded, crouching beside the puppy's kennel. The dog wagged its tail happily at him, pressing its tiny nose against the metal bars. "Yeah, but more importantly, does he want me? That's how I like to choose my dogs." Dylan let out a short, incredulous laugh. "That's cute. But I don't think you get how this works. I saw him first, and I'm willing to pay whatever it takes to make sure he comes home with me." He turned to the employee, pulling out his wallet. "How much for the dog?" The woman looked uncomfortable. "Sir, we don't sell dogs. We adopt them out to responsible owners who..." "Fine. A donation then." Dylan pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills and smirked. 10 grand. That should be enough to make sure I get what I want, right?" Keanu stood up slowly, his eyes darkening, but he kept his composure. He looked at Dylan for a long moment, then back at the puppy, who seemed much more interested in Keanu than in the arrogant young man waving money around. "You can't buy love," Keanu said simply. Dylan scoffed. "Spare me the fortune cookie wisdom. Money talks, and I just made an offer. So, do we have a deal or not?" The shelter employee hesitated. She knew who Keanu was, knew that he had a heart of gold, had donated to countless charities, and would give the dog the best life imaginable. But the shelter was struggling. $10,000 would help keep the doors open for months. Keanu saw the hesitation and smiled sadly. "It's okay," he said softly, giving the dog one last pat. "I won't force anything. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be." He turned to leave, his demeanor as calm as ever. But there was something in his eyes, a quiet disappointment, not for himself, but for the situation. Dylan smirked, triumphant. "Smart choice." He turned to the shelter employee. "Bag him up, or whatever you do. I'll send my driver over later to pick him up." As he strutted out of the shelter, the puppy let out a soft whimper, watching Keanu walk away. The staff members exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew they had just made a mistake. But they had no idea just how big of a mistake it was. Keanu Reeves wasn't the type to make a scene. He wasn't the type to demand things, throw around money, or expect special treatment. But as he stood in the middle of Sunny Paws Shelter, looking at the smug grin plastered across Dylan Whitmore's face, He felt an unfamiliar sting of frustration. The puppy he had connected with, a small, bright-eyed Siberian husky, was now in the arms of a man who treated everything like a transaction. Keanu could tell, just from the way Dylan held the dog, that this wasn't about love. This wasn't about giving the puppy a home. It was about power, about winning. Still, Keanu took a slow breath and spoke calmly. "Look, man, I don't want to make this difficult. I've been looking to adopt a rescue dog for a while, and I felt a connection with this little guy." His voice was measured, respectful. "Are you sure you really want him?" Dylan chuckled, adjusting his grip on the puppy as if it were an expensive handbag. "Yeah, I'm sure. He's mine now." The shelter employee, the woman who had been assisting them, cleared her throat nervously. "Mr. Whitmore, I really think it's important that our dogs go to homes where they'll be—" Dylan cut her off with a smirk. "Where they'll be what? Loved? Taken care of? I think my mansion private chef and staff of caretakers will do just fine." He rolled his eyes. "Besides, I already made a donation, right? So I believe that settles it." Keanu's jaw tightened. He had encountered people like this before, people who thought money solved everything, who believed their wealth gave them the right to anything they wanted. He could have pushed back, could have tried to reason with Dylan, but deep down, he already knew how this would end. Instead, he simply nodded. "All right. If that's your choice." And with that, he turned on his heel and walked away. The shelter staff was stunned. Dylan, expecting more of a fight, watched him go with an amused expression. "Wow, that was easier than I thought." He turned back to the employee. "I'll send my driver over to pick up the dog later. Make sure he's clean and ready to go." The woman hesitated. Something felt wrong, but $10,000 was more than their shelter had seen in months. The harsh reality was that, no matter how much they disliked Dylan, the money would help dozens of other animals. Still, something nagged at her. After Dylan left, she retreated behind the shelter's front desk, still unsettled. The name Keanu was stuck in her head. He looked so familiar, but she hadn't placed him right away. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she finally typed the name into Google. And then she froze. Keanu Reeves, Hollywood actor, philanthropist, known for donating millions to charity, helping strangers, and living a humble life. Despite his fame, her stomach twisted. "Oh my God," she whispered. Another staff member leaned over. "What's wrong?" She turned the screen toward them, and their eyes widened. That was Keanu Reeves. The younger employee gasped. "As in the Keanu Reeves?" They all looked toward the door, as if expecting him to walk back in. "I think we just made a huge mistake," the older woman muttered. And as they sat there, staring at the screen filled with headlines about Keanu's generosity and kindness, one thought kept circling in their minds. Dylan Whitmore had taken that puppy for all the wrong reasons. And Lorraine, Keanu Reeves, one of the kindest men in Hollywood, had walked away without a single complaint. But fate had a funny way of balancing things. Because Dylan was about to find out that money couldn't buy everything. The tension in the shelter was palpable as the staff hovered around the computer screen. The Google search results painted a picture of Keanu Reeves that starkly contrasted with the entitled, smug demeanor of Dylan Whitmore. Article after article detailed Keanu's generosity, how he quietly donated millions to children's hospitals, took pay cuts so crew members could get better wages, and had even been seen sitting on the streets, chatting with homeless people like they were lifelong friends. But what caught the shelter workers' attention most was a story buried among the search results. Keanu Reeves had once rescued a stray dog from a film set and adopted it on the spot. He had named the dog Archie and had spoken in interviews about how much the animal meant to him. The article quoted him saying, "Dogs don't care about fame, money, or power. They just want love. And they give it unconditionally." The realization hit them like a ton of bricks. They had just let one of the most compassionate animal lovers in the world walk away empty-handed, while giving a vulnerable puppy to a man who had treated the adoption process like a business deal. Did we really just hand that poor dog over to Dylan Whitmore? The younger staff member muttered, rubbing her temples. The older woman, the one who had originally spoken to Dylan, let out a deep sigh. "I thought we had no choice. $10,000 was a lot of money for this shelter, but I can't shake the feeling that we made a terrible mistake." As if on cue, The sound of a car screeching to a halt outside made them all look up. The front doors swung open, and a breathless woman stormed in. She was dressed in a pristine black blazer, her blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail. She looked furious. I need to talk to someone right now, she demanded. The staff exchanged glances. Mom, did you give a Siberian husky puppy to Dylan Whitmore? She cut in, eyes blazing. The older woman hesitated. Yes, a few hours ago. The woman closed her eyes and muttered a curse under her breath. Unbelievable. Who are you? The younger staff member asked. The woman exhaled sharply. I'm Charlotte Greaves. I manage PR for the Whitmore family. The staff stiffened. Charlotte pinched the bridge of her nose. I don't know how much you know about Dylan, but I can guarantee you one thing: he did not want that dog. He only took it to prove a point, to show that his money could get him whatever he wanted. She shook her head. And now, he's treating it like garbage. A cold dread settled over the staff. What do you mean? The older woman asked, already fearing the answer. Charlotte huffed. I mean, he's ignoring it. He left it locked in his private gym, with no food, no water, and no care. Because his words, it keeps barking. And I don't have time for that. She clenched her fists. His assistant found it whimpering in the corner and called me because she didn't know what to do. The younger staff member felt sick to her stomach. He abandoned it already, Charlotte scoffed. Abandoned? He never wanted it in the first place. Dylan only did this to show off. I don't know who else was here when he took the dog, but I'd bet my entire career that this was never about adoption, it was about power. A deep silence filled the shelter. The older woman was the first to speak. We need to get that puppy back. Charlotte smirked. Glad we're on the same page. Meanwhile, at the Whitmore estate, Dylan sat on the plush leather couch in his penthouse, scrolling through his phone without a care in the world. The glass walls gave him a view of the entire city, but he barely noticed. He was too busy checking his Instagram notifications, making sure his new post just got a new pup. Guess I'm a dog dad now. Was getting enough likes. From the next room, he heard whining. His jaw clenched. Shut up, he muttered, tossing his phone onto the couch. The puppy had been locked in his private gym since the moment his driver had dropped it off. Dylan had played with it for maybe 5 minutes before realizing that it required effort. It barked, it whined, it tried to chew on things. And most annoyingly, he had peed on the floor. Disgusting. He had called his assistant, ordering her to handle it, but she had refused, saying, "You adopted it, you take care of it." Now the dog wouldn't stop making noise. Dylan stood, annoyed, and walked toward the gym. He opened the door and found the puppy curled up in the corner, its blue eyes looking up at him hopefully. It wagged its tail. Dylan groaned. Yeah, no. This isn't gonna work. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number. Hey, Liam, he said when his driver picked up. Yeah, I need you to come pick something up. I'm done with it. The puppy whimpered again. Dylan rolled his eyes. Yeah, he said into the phone. It's the dog. Back at the shelter, Charlotte's phone buzzed. She pulled it out, glanced at the caller employees. That was fast. He already wants to get rid of it. The older woman set her jaw. We're taking that dog back tonight. Charlotte nodded. Agreed. And when we do, she pulled up her own phone, scrolling through messages. I think it's time we let a certain someone know that the dog is up for adoption again. She tapped on a name. Keanu Reeves. Dylan Whitmore had never been told no in his life. He was used to getting whatever he wanted, and when he grew tired of something, he discarded it like yesterday's news. The problem was, this time, he wasn't dealing with an object. He was dealing with a living, breathing creature, and the dog knew. In the moment Dylan brought the husky puppy home, things didn't go the way he expected. The dog refused to listen to him, ignored his half-hearted attempts to play, and outright avoided him when possible. At first, Dylan found it amusing. A stubborn little thing, huh? But amusement quickly turned into irritation. He had only taken the dog to show Keanu Reeves that he could, but now, this fluffy nuisance was becoming a headache. The breaking point: by the third day, Dylan had had enough. The morning had started with an embarrassing mess. His expensive sneakers, a limited edition pair that had cost more than most people made in a month, were now completely ruined, shredded. The culprit, the very same puppy that he had locked in his gym overnight. Dylan's temper flared as he stormed into the gym, his voice cutting through the silence like a whip. "Are you kidding me?" The puppy shrank back, ears flattened, sensing the anger radiating off of him. "I spent $2,000 on those," Dylan raged, waving the destroyed shoes in the air. "You stupid mutt!" The puppy let out a small whimper, curling into itself, but Dylan wasn't done. He grabbed the dog by the scruff of its neck and lifted it slightly off the ground. "What the hell am I supposed to do with you?" he snapped. Roamed just outside the gym, someone was watching. Caught on camera, Sofia Martinez had worked for the Whitmore family for nearly 5 years. As one of the housekeepers, she had seen her fair share of entitled behavior. But Dylan was on another level. She had kept quiet about a lot of things. His tantrums, his recklessness, his utter lack of respect for people. But this was too far. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. She pressed record. Through the small crack in the door, she caught everything. The way Dylan roughly handled the puppy, the anger in his voice, the way he shook the poor thing when it wouldn't stop whimpering. Then came the moment that made her stomach turn. Dylan, still fuming, threw the puppy down onto the gym floor. Not hard enough to seriously injure it, but hard enough that it let out a yelp and scrambled away, shaking in fear. Sofia had seen enough. She stopped recording and slipped away before Dylan noticed her. Her heart pounded in her chest. She knew she was risking her job, but in that moment, she didn't care. This needed to be seen, going viral. The video hit the internet that night. At first, it started small, a few retweets, a handful of shares, but then it exploded. A popular animal rights activist reposted the video with the caption, "This is how billionaire heir Dylan Whitmore treats animals. Disgusting." Justice for the puppy. The backlash was instant. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok lit up with outrage. Celebrities chimed in. Animal welfare organizations demanded action. Within hours, "Cancel Dylan Whitmore" was trending worldwide. But the biggest bombshell came when someone made the connection. Dylan had stolen the dog out of pure pettiness, from none other than Keanu Reeves. The internet lost it. Meme pages had a field day. Keanu fans flooded Dylan's social media with angry comments. News outlets picked up the story, painting Dylan as the ultimate spoiled brat who had snatched a dog away from a Hollywood legend, only to abuse it. And then came the phone call. The fall of Dylan Whitmore, Dylan's father, was not a man to be embarrassed. His empire was built on power and reputation, and he had spent decades making sure the Whitmore name was untouchable. So when he saw his son's name splashed across every major news outlet, for animal cruelty no less, he was livid. The conversation was short and brutal. "You are a disgrace," Richard growled over the phone. "Do you have any idea how much damage you've done?" Dylan, pacing in his penthouse, tried to downplay it. "Dad, it's just some internet outrage. It'll blow over." "It won't," Richard snapped. "Not this time. You've lost every brand deal. You've been banned from 3 major clubs. And worst of all, people are calling for legal action." "Legal action?" Richard let out a humorless laugh. "The animal shelter you bribed is pressing charges for fraudulent adoption. Not to mention you could face animal cruelty charges. Congratulations, Dylan. You've single-handedly turned yourself into the most hated man in America." Dylan's mouth went dry. "Fix this," Richard ordered, "or don't bother calling me again." The call ended. Dylan collapsed onto the couch, running a hand through his hair. This couldn't be happening. This was just a dog. Why did people care so much? But the damage was done. The puppy's fate, and an unexpected savior. Meanwhile, in a quiet home across town, a familiar face watched the chaos unfold on the news. Keanu Reeves sipped his coffee, his expression unreadable as he listened to the reporter detail Dylan's public downfall. The video of the abuse played on repeat, and Keanu felt a deep sense of sadness. Not just for the dog, but for how cruel some people could be. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Mr. Reeves, I work at Sunny Paws Shelter. We have something that belongs to you. If you're still interested in adopting that husky, he's waiting for you." Keanu smiled. He grabbed his keys. Some things in life were meant to be. Dylan Whitmore had spent his life believing that money could fix anything. A scandal? Pay the right people. A mistake? Throw some cash at it. A bad reputation? Buy good PR. At this time, things were different. The fallout from the video had been worse than he ever could have imagined. Social media had turned against him. Celebrities had condemned him. And even his so-called friends had distanced themselves. Overnight, he had become a pariah. And his father, his powerful, ruthless father, had reached his limit. "If you don't fix this," Richard Whitmore had growled over the phone, "you're done, Dylan. I will cut you off. No more money, no more trust fund, no more inheritance, nothing." Dylan had tried to argue, but the line had already gone dead. For the first time in his life, Dylan felt something unfamiliar. Fear. And so, the next morning, dressed in an uncharacteristically casual outfit, jeans and a hoodie, as if trying to appear normal, Dylan arrived at Sunny Paw's shelter. He knew exactly what to say. The staff wasn't expecting him, and when he walked in, all conversation stopped. Eyes narrowed. The older woman from before Gloria, he thought her name was, folded her arms. "What are you doing here?" Dylan sighed, putting on his best remorseful face. "Look, I know I messed up." He shook his head as if he was the victim. "The internet has totally blown this out of proportion, and—" Gloria cut him off. "You threw a puppy. That's not something people blow out of proportion." Dylan swallowed his irritation. He had to play this smart. "I want to make things right," he said, softening his tone. "I want to return the dog and maybe, I don't know, donate more money, help the shelter, show people I care." No one in the room looked convinced. Gloria exchanged a glance with a younger staff member, Mia, before turning back to him. "We don't want your money, Dylan." That caught him off guard. "Wait, what?" Mia stepped forward, arms crossed. "That's all you do, isn't it? Try to buy your way out of trouble?" She shook her head. "You didn't want that dog. You only took him because you could. And now, because your daddy threatened to cut you off, you're here pretending to care." Dylan's jaw clenched. "I do care." "No," Gloria said firmly. "You don't." The room went silent. Finally, Dylan exhaled sharply. "Fine, take the stupid dog back." He turned toward the door, waving a dismissive hand. "I'll have my driver bring him over." "We're going to do more than take him back," Gloria said, voice calm but unwavering. "We're making sure you never adopt another animal again." Dylan froze. "We've already spoken to animal welfare organizations," Mia added. "There will be an official complaint against you. You'll be blacklisted from every reputable shelter and rescue center in the country." For the first time, real panic flickered across Dylan's face. "You can't be serious." Gloria gave him a long, hard look. "I've never been more serious." Dylan had never felt powerless before, but as he stood there surrounded by people who saw through him, he realized he had lost. Just as Dylan was about to leave, the door to the shelter opened. A hush fell over the room. Dylan turned and his stomach dropped. Keanu Reeves stepped inside, dressed in his usual simple attire: jeans, a dark shirt, and an air of effortless kindness. His presence alone seemed to change the atmosphere, filling it with quiet respect. Dylan felt small. Keanu glanced around, then focused on Gloria. "I got your message." Gloria's in the back. "We knew you'd come." Dylan watched, frozen, as Keanu followed Mia toward the back kennels. It wasn't until Keanu was out of sight that Dylan finally snapped out of his trance. "Wait, what is he doing here?" Gloria gave him a knowing smile. "Something you'll never understand." Dylan left without another word. In the back room, the husky puppy sat curled in a warm blanket. Keanu crouched down, offering his hand. The puppy sniffed, then wagged its tail, immediately climbing into his lap, as if it had been waiting for him all along. Mia laughed. "Well, I think that's your answer?" Keanu scratched behind the puppy's ears, his expression soft. "Yeah," he murmured. "I think so too." The puppy, no longer belonging to a selfish heir, no longer a pawn in a petty game, had finally found his home. Dylan Whitmore was halfway to his car when he heard a voice behind him. "Dylan!" He knew that voice instantly. Pausing, he turned around to see Keanu Reeves standing just outside the shelter's door, hands in his pockets, the husky puppy cradled in his arms. Dylan braced himself for public humiliation, for some self-righteous speech about how he was a terrible person. He had dealt with backlash his whole life, people envying him, hating him, judging him. He was ready to roll his eyes and move on. But Keanu's expression wasn't angry. It wasn't smug. It was calm. And that unsettled Dylan more than anything. Keanu took a slow step forward, adjusting his hold on the puppy, who licked his hand affectionately. "You know," he said, voice even, "I wasn't going to say anything. I figured the internet had already said enough." Dylan forced a smirk. "Oh yeah. Loving the death threats, by the way, real classy." Keanu nodded, unbothered by the sarcasm. "What's the thing about the world? People don't always react the right way to bad behavior." Dylan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Keanu exhaled, glancing at the puppy in his arms. "I don't think you're a bad person, Dylan." Dylan blinked. "Excuse me? I think you're a kid who's never had to take responsibility for anything." Keanu looked him in the eye, his voice steady but firm. "You've had everything handed to you. You've never had to struggle, never had to work for anything, never had to wonder if you were good enough, because the world already told you that you were, just because of your last name." Dylan stiffened. "You don't know anything about me." Keanu gave him a small, knowing smile. "I know more than you think." For a moment there was silence. Then Keanu spoke again, softer this time. "When I was young, I lost my father," he said. "He left when I was 3. My mother worked hard, but we moved around a lot. I struggled in school. I never had stability." He looked at Dylan, his dark eyes full of something deeper. "And later, I lost my best friend. I lost the love of my life. I lost my daughter before she even had a chance to be born." Dylan's smirk faltered. Keanu continued, his voice steady but carrying a weight Dylan didn't know how to handle. "The thing is, loss teaches you things. It teaches you what really matters. And I had to learn, over and over again, that money doesn't mean anything if you don't have kindness. If you don't have people who truly care about you." Dylan crossed his arms, uncomfortable. "Yeah, well, I don't do the whole sad backstory thing." Keanu just looked at him. "I know, and that's the problem." Dylan clenched his jaw, not knowing what to say. "I'm not here to make you feel bad," Keanu continued. "I just want you to understand something." He nodded toward the puppy. "This little guy, he doesn't care about your money. He doesn't care about your last name. He just wanted love." Dylan swallowed. "And so do you," Keanu added. "You've just never had to ask for it." Dylan felt something twist in his gut. He wanted to say something snarky, to brush it off, to walk away. But for the first time in his life, he couldn't. Because deep down, in a place he never let himself acknowledge, Keanu was right. Dylan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "So what? You want me to apologize? You want me to grovel?" Keanu shook his head. "No. I want you to think about who you want to be." Dylan scoffed. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Keanu said, "that right now the world sees you as a spoiled kid who threw away a dog and tried to buy his way out of the consequences. You can prove them right, or you can prove them wrong." Dylan's throat felt tight. "And how exactly do I do that?" Keanu shrugged. "That's up to you." He adjusted the puppy in his arms, gave Dylan one last look, then turned back toward the shelter. Dylan stood there, watching him go, feeling something unfamiliar. Guilt. Not because the internet was mad at him, not because his father had threatened him. But because, for the first time in his life, he realized he had been wrong. And that realization burned more than any public scandal ever could. Later that night, as Dylan scrolled through the never-ending flood of hate comments, he found himself opening a blank post. For once, He didn't run it by his PR team. He just typed, "I messed up." No excuses, no PR spin, just the truth. I took that puppy because I thought I could. I treated him like an object, not a living thing. And I deserve the backlash I'm getting. He stared at the screen for a long time before continuing, "But I want to be better. Not because my father told me to, not because the internet is angry, but because someone reminded me that being rich doesn't make me a good person. Being kind does." Dylan hit post before he could second guess himself. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was pretending. Meanwhile, at Sunny Paw's shelter, Keanu sat with the husky puppy curled up beside him. The little dog let out a happy sigh, pressing against his side, already feeling safe. Keanu smiled, scratching behind the puppy's ears. "Looks like we were meant to find each other." "Huh?" The puppy licked his hand, tail wagging. And just like that, the little husky finally had the home he had always deserved.